We're bringing you this seminar from a completely different setting today, and I trust that you'll enjoy the teaching. We're in a place in northern BC, British Columbia, and in Quesnel, and we have the subject of binding or taking the dominion over spirits. And we thought that possibly you could appreciate the story in the scriptures more, appreciating it because of the place that we are taking these pictures. We're going to discuss the subject of binding or taking dominion. And some people get a little bit confused, I think, with regarding to casting out of spirits and the difference between binding or taking control over. To take control means to just cause not to be effective for a certain given period of time. Not casting out, but just taking control over. And casting out is deliberately seeing a deliverance where you see a miracle, because a person is a miracle of healing in essence when a spirit is cast out. But taking control over is binding on a temporary basis. So let's go into the scriptures for just a few minutes, and we will see a portion of scripture that we trust will become much more alive to our hearts as we study it. This goes into Luke chapter 19, and we're going to read from verses 29 through to verse 38. And it came to pass, when he came nigh to Bethpage and Bethany, now we're talking about Jesus, at the mount called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying, Go into the village over against you, in the which at your entering you will find a colt tied, whereon yet never man sat. Loose him and bring him here. And if any man asks you, Why do you loose him? This is what you're going to say to him, Because the Lord has need of him. And they that were sent went their way, and found even as he had said unto them. And as they were loosing the colt, the owners thereof said unto them, Why loose you the colt? And they said, The Lord hath need of him. And they brought him to Jesus, and they cast their garments upon the colt, and they sat Jesus thereon. And as they went, they spread their clothes in the way. And when he was come nigh, even now at the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, Blessed be the King that comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Now this is a beautiful story. We read it, and just before when Jesus is taken to the cross, we call this a triumphal entry into Jerusalem. We have the king riding upon this animal, King Jesus. And we look at the story and we think, well, that's just a very nice, simple story of Jesus getting on an animal and walking down the street, and the people are throwing their garments before the animal, and then they are praising God, as though this is just a typical thing that happens every day. But we want to show you something about taking the dominion. We're going to study about taking the dominion over the spirits of animals. Now, we've already discussed that spirit is life and life is spirit, and animals have spirit. Anything that has life has spirit, so it's alive. And so when Jesus wanted to take the dominion over the spirit of the animal, he didn't actually come out and say, now, I'm going to take the dominion over your spirit, because we're going to see something special here about what happened in the life of Jesus. I used to live on the farm a number of years ago. And this also reminds me a little bit of my daddy's ranch out in the country of Alberta province. Us children used to sit up on the fence and watch him as he trained the animals. And we used to get up on the fence, all 7 of us, and watch him one day particularly when he was trying to train a horse. It was a new horse, and one that had never been ridden before. He took the animal and taught it how to halter train, first of all. And then he got the bridle on it. He had to get it used to the bit in its mouth. Horses don't like bits for a while till they get used to it. And then he led the horse around and got the horse used to leading by the halter and the bridle. Now, of course, the next thing that came was that he had to teach the horse how to ride. He wanted to use this horse for getting cattle and so on. So there was a blanket sitting on the corral fence and the saddle. And Daddy had to get this animal so that it would not be afraid of saddles and bridles and blankets and all the things that go with riding horses. So he took the blanket from off the fence, very, very slowly, because this animal was not liking any fast movement of any kind, and it was afraid of this blanket. So very, very slowly, my daddy would take that blanket off the fence, and he would bring it up to the horse and just sort of wave it very, very gently in front of the horse's nose, and so the horse could see it with its eyes. That horse would just rear back, and no way did that horse want to have that blanket near it at all. Scared, very scared of it. Over and over again, Daddy would do this. He was such a gentle person. He never, ever would hurt an animal, and very careful to treat it very gently. Finally, he got the horse used to at least that blanket moving around in front of its nose everywhere he would throw the blanket. The next thing would come, of course, was now to put the blanket on top of the horse. Well, he got the blanket finally up on top of the horse. It took a little while for him to get that horse steadied before he would even get the blanket there. And the horse didn't even like the blanket temporarily and bucked it off, but sooner or later the horse got used to it. The next thing, of course, that would come would be the saddle on top of the horse. And again, he took the saddle off of the corral and put it over on top of the horse. Now again, the horse didn't like the feel of that saddle on its back, so off came the saddle as well. Pretty soon he got the saddle cinched up. Now the next thing that was supposed to come was the ride. Oh, that was the thing. So all of us kids were excited sitting on there watching Daddy. And he got up onto the horse, and that horse gave him a real good ride. But very soon he got that horse in control, and the horse now was ready to ride. It took a little while for him to kind of get it simmered down, just to get its spirit quietened just a little bit. There was something else about this horse, and I think most animals are this way, at least horses I know are this way. Do you know that they will never walk over blankets or anything, clothing or anything like this that's laying on the ground? Never do it. They shy away from it, maybe because they're afraid it might be a hole or something underneath, I don't know what, but there's something, an instinct in them that doesn't want to walk over blankets. And I find something very, very, very significant about this story of Jesus going into Jerusalem on this animal. You see, when the Bible says here that Jesus came and sat on this animal whereon yet never man sat, Jesus didn't go through the routine my daddy did to get this animal trained. And as you know, donkeys, asses are part of the horse family. And I've been to this famous Calgary Stampede. It's world famous there in Alberta. And I can remember going to see the old chuck wagon races and the bucking broncs, and oh, that's an exciting event. Oh, woo-hoo, ride 'em cowboy. Oh, they just get right in there, and they give you a real good time watching them there in the grandstands. And some of them are professional cowboys. Now, I know that they have some horses that have never been ridden before. And some of them, of course, they are trained in the sense to buck, and they know how to get them to buck. But animals that have never been ridden before will buck off the first thing that gets on their back. But we see Jesus doing something here. He is put on the back of this animal. They spread garments on the animal before they ever put Jesus on. Not only that, but they take off their coats and their clothing, and it says that they spread them in the way, laying them right in front of this animal. Now, this is not a normal procedure. Now, we note here in this story that Jesus did not say, "I take the dominion." But by his very, very presence, we note that the animal's spirit was quietened, and it very nicely walked along as though it had been trained for years to have a rider on its back. Now, I'll guarantee you something else. That when that colt got back to its original owner, that the next person that got on its back would have gotten bucked off. I think we might look back at this story of Daniel in the lion's den. And you see, we're going to see something very scriptural there, very typical, though maybe we've never stopped to analyze it. When Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, the nature of those animals were to eat whatever was thrown to them. They were starved. They were very hungry, and they would throw in live bodies into these animals' dens, and the animals would rip them to shreds. That is the nature of the beasts. It's not anything contrary. That's the way they were. However, when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, something happened, and in this case, the dominion was taken over the spirit of that animal, and it did not act on a normal circumstance at that given time. It was completely foreign to its regular way of acting. So what happened? Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, and the scriptures say that God closed the mouths of the lions. So Daniel, no doubt, used one of them to put his head on at night to sleep. But I'll guarantee you something else. When the king came and called Daniel out of the lion's den the next day, the next person that would have been thrown into that lion's den would have gotten torn to shreds. When we talk of taking the dominion, it's just on a temporary basis. It's not casting out. You see, those lions remained alive. The donkey that Jesus rode on remained alive. But their spirit is momentarily taken control of so that they will not do what they ordinarily would do under the circumstances. I get a charge as well out of this story of Jesus, because when Jesus said, go over to the village over against you, and where you enter you will find a colt tied, whereon yet never man sat. Loose him and bring him here. And if they say, well, why do you loose him? They will say unto him, because the Lord hath need of him. You know, the way I see it, I've got myself a car, and as most of us have, and if somebody were to come and take my little Dodge Colt and say, hey, look, you know, I'm going to take your car and go riding with it, I would come out and say, hey, listen, where are you taking this? I mean, you just don't go and take somebody else's Dodge Colt without saying where you're taking it. And then, of course, these people were to say, the disciples were supposed to say, well, the Lord hath need of him. Well, at this point, I would scratch my head and say, well, who's the Lord? This, to me, is something significant as well. It was obviously something that when they spoke that word, that the person, or even the owner of that individual, would have been just more than glad to give Jesus the colt to ride on. And I will guarantee you that the man got his colt back again after Jesus had ridden on him. I had a situation one time in looking over the subject of taking the dominion over animals. I had a time in my life when I was really close to the Lord. I was just really rejoicing in the Lord, and I was working on a daily basis on a secular job. We had our office right beside a restaurant, and the restaurant owners had a big dog that was a watchdog because it was sort of secluded in that area. The owner had taken the dog out for a little walk that day, and that dog had always had to have somebody holding on to it. It had to be tied up unless the owner was holding on to it, because if you just let it go, it might bite somebody. It was a vicious dog and trained to be vicious. What happened was, I was walking over to the picnic table, and as we came over to the picnic table, there was this woman who was now taking her dog out for a little walk, and she was just walking along beside the dog, and I came up towards the picnic table. I was during my coffee break, I might add. And as we came over to the table, here's this woman. She is just getting ready to come right up to the table, and I'm coming right at the same time to meet her. She grabbed a hold of the dog's collar because she knew that she couldn't let that dog loose. Now, as I was watching her, that dog was just jumping all over the place. He looked like he had ants in his pants, you know, just all over, jumping. He really looked like he was a nervous thing. Pretty soon, she sat down at the bench at the picnic table, and I came over and sat down on the other side of the bench. We started to talk. She said to me, I guess we must have sat there for about 15 minutes, and I'm realizing that my coffee break is just about over. she said to me, the dog, look at that, look at the dog. Just look at that dog, would you? She says, he's just so quiet. He's just laying down there, just so nice and so quiet. He's just laying there and he's going, just so quiet. I says, well, what's wrong with the dog? She says, well, he's never done that before. And I says, well, why not? She says, well, I have never let go of that dog's collar at any given time like this when I've been talking with somebody. But he's just laying there in the shade, just panting, so quiet. And I says, well, I don't know what's, I didn't realize that this would be an unusual thing. Now, all of a sudden, I remembered the story of Jesus in the Scriptures. How his spirit had, by his very presence, his spirit had quieted that animal. And I had also remembered in my heart that I had been praying and I had just been so very close to the Lord, and I really felt his presence with me during that time. I didn't have an opportunity to say to that woman, you know, this is something that is of God. I believe that that animal senses the actual spirit of Christ in me. However, she looked at her watch and I looked at my watch and I said, oh golly, I've got to go back into my office again and go to work. I wanted so much to remain and tell her the story of this animal, but it just wasn't possible. So I turned around and left the place where I was at the picnic table and walked back into my office, and when I looked back again in the direction of where the picnic table was, there was this woman. The dog is now up again, jumping around, up and around all over the place like it's got ants in his pants again. I feel this, that even animals, birds, creatures actually sense the presence of God. And even that very presence will quieten their spirits so that they will recognize then that presence of God in your life. I think that's the way it should be with all of us. Taking the dominion. And in that case, now, as we note both in the story of Jesus and also in the story of the dog that I was telling you about, nothing was said. It was just something that was the presence of Christ alone that did it. But I want to take you into another story to show you that occasionally you might have to speak directly that word of faith in order to take the dominion and take complete control by that spoken word over the spirit of an animal right at a given time. This is a story of a man who had taught me in the things of God, and I take that the story that he told me was authentic, but I thought I would share it with you. He had been asked by a very wealthy man to come and minister to his daughter. His daughter was sick and apparently in very, very bad shape. He was supposed to go into his place of residence. They had a very large iron railing around the residence because of them being wealthy, and they were always afraid of possible burglars and so on coming in. They had two big watchdogs. These big watchdogs were trained to bite, trained to attack. That was their nature. Can't blame dogs when they're trained to do a certain thing. This man had been asked to come in on this given day. So he drove up with his car, parked outside, went through the gates, and started to walk up the pathway. And as he walked up the pathway, he heard the rattle of chains. Oh, maybe I should rattle these a little bit here to give you an idea. He heard the rattle of chains. And all of a sudden, he saw two big burly dogs running out from behind the house. Those dogs were getting ready to barrel down on him. He said he looked at those animals and he just stood there. He almost froze momentarily. He knew very well, because he'd seen animals before, that when they were ready to bite, they weren't standing there barking. Now, dogs that bark a lot don't generally bite. But these dogs were not in the barking mood. They were ready to bite. And they barreled down on him, and they got right in front of him. And they were ready to jump. They were down on their haunches, just ready to take a leap at him. Now, at that point, he did not say, now let me see, what gift of the Spirit am I going to use here? He had no time whatsoever to say, what gift will I use? And if you'll come back next time, I'll tell you what happened to those animals.